The key hangs on a cord gone soft as cloth, worn down by 70-some years of hands, and she doesn't hand it to the girl right away. She just holds it up to the light coming through the milkhouse window, the glass still fogged the way it's been fogged since 1979. "You want to know why I locked it?" she says. Not a question. The girl, 15, visiting for 2 weeks in July, sneakers already ruined by the gravel drive, nods anyway. Her grandmother doesn't answer yet. She fits the key into the padlock, and it goes in the way it always has. Smooth, like the metal remembers the shape of her hand better than she remembers most people's faces now. Behind her, 340 acres of Nebraska panhandle roll out toward a sky, doing that thing it does in late afternoon, going the color of a bruise that's almost healed. Somewhere past the tree line, a neighbor's dog is barking at nothing. It's 86 degrees. It was 86 degrees the day of the funeral, too. She remembers that, remembers sweating through a black dress that wasn't even hers, borrowed from her sister-in-law because her own hadn't come back from the cleaners in time. She was 68 years old. The whole family had come back to the house after, cousins, in-laws, the pastor, 40 or 50 people milling around the yard with paper plates of ham and potato salad, and she'd walked straight past all of them, past her own son trying to say something comforting, and gone to the milkhouse with a padlock she'd bought that morning at the hardware store in town, still in its plastic packaging. She remembers the sound it made snapping shut. She remembers her son saying, "Mom, what are you doing?" in the voice people use when they think grief has finally caught up to somebody. The whole family was standing right there, watching. Nobody said a word for a good 10 seconds, and then everybody said something at once. Because there was no reason for it. The milkhouse hadn't been used for actual milk in going on 15 years. Her husband had let the dairy contracts lapse one by one after his back started going, and the building had turned into the kind of place families use to store things they can't decide whether to throw away. A padlock on a shed like that, on the day of a funeral, in front of God and everybody, it looked like exactly what they all assumed it was. A woman coming apart at the seams and doing something strange with her hands because her hands needed somewhere to go. She let them think that for a long time. The girl is watching her now the same way, waiting for the door to open, waiting for the answer to arrive quick, the way answers do on a phone screen. But her grandmother's hand stays on the lock a second longer than it needs to, and when she finally looks up, there's something in her face that isn't sadness at all. "That's not sadness," she says, more to the lock than to the girl. "That's math." She lets go of the padlock and starts walking the length of the milkhouse, one hand trailing along the cinder block, like she's counting something only she can see. 41 years she was married to him. Married in June, on a day so hot the Reverend cut the service short, and they moved onto the Cootersport place that same week. 140 acres his father had cleared, his grandfather before that. A bank barn, with a green tin roof, you could see from the county road a half-mile off. She tells the girl this fast, the way she tells most things now, like the telling itself is a chore to get through before the weather turns. He was a good farmer and a stubborn man, she says, and those two things are not always the same thing. 60 head of Holsteins at the peak of it. Then the co-op prices started sliding somewhere around 2015, and his back went not long after. 2 herniated discs from 30 years of hauling feed sacks and hip-checking gates. And one by one he let the contracts lapse instead of asking anybody for help lifting anything. That's the kind of man he was. March 14th. She says the date plain. No catch in her voice. Like she's reading it off a form, because she has said it enough times now that it doesn't cut the way it used to. A Tuesday. He was out checking the fence line on the North 40 before breakfast, and by the time she found him, the frost hadn't even burned off the grass yet. What was left after $38,000 in equipment debt, most of it on a used baler, and a manure spreader he'd financed the year before, thinking milk prices had to come back up eventually. They hadn't. The co-op was paying out at a 5-year low that spring. Barely enough some months to cover the diesel, let alone a note on machinery sitting idle in a shed. She had 140 acres, a name on a deed, and a stack of mail from the bank she wasn't opening yet. Everybody in town knew the numbers before she did, more or less. That's how a county like that works, whether you want it to or not. The feed store clerk knew, the loan officer's wife knew, and she told her sister, who told the woman at the diner counter, and by the time of the funeral, there wasn't a soul in 3 townships who didn't already have an opinion about what a widow with that kind of debt ought to do with 140 acres of played-out dairy ground. Sell it. That was the opinion. Sell it fast, sell it whole, sell it before the bank makes the decision for you. She heard all of it. She nodded at all of it. And then she walked straight from the graveside to the milk house nobody had touched in 15 years. And she put a padlock on the door, and she kept the only key. Come here. Mind the step. It drops more than you'd think. That reception. You want to know what a reception looks like in a farmhouse that's about to lose its farm? Folding tables. Ham sandwiches cut in triangles. Her husband's brother, 3 sherbet punches in, standing by the mantel like he'd rehearsed it. He was loud about the herd. Loud in that way men get loud when they've decided kindness means having an opinion for you. 41 head of Holstein and Jersey Cross, still milking, still eating hay that cost money nobody had. He said it to the room more than to her, said the sensible thing, the responsible thing, was to call the livestock broker out of the county before the week was out, take whatever the market gave, stop the bleeding. He used that word, bleeding. Like the farm was a body somebody could still save if they moved fast enough. She didn't answer him. Doesn't mean she didn't hear him. She heard every word, the same way she'd heard every word at the feed store, and the diner counter, and the funeral home parking lot, where 2 women she'd known 30 years stood by their car and didn't lower their voices near enough. She'd gotten good, that month, at hearing things and giving nothing back. Grief will teach you that if nothing else does, how to be a wall. She set her paper cup down on the table, still had punch in it. She walked out through the kitchen, past her sister-in-law's casserole dish, past a second cousin she couldn't place, out the screen door, and across the yard toward the milk house standing there in the November light, looking exactly like what it was, a building nobody had needed in 15 years. The relatives noticed. That's the part people still talk about, if you get them talking. They noticed her go, and a few of them followed as far as the porch, and they watched her take the padlock off a nail inside the door. Her husband's father had kept that padlock hanging right there, out of habit, out of some old farmer's instinct that a door ought to lock even when there's nothing behind it worth locking. And she closed the milk house door herself, and she snapped that lock shut with her own hand, and she put the key in the pocket of the dress she'd worn to bury her husband. Nobody said anything to her about it that day. What was there to say? A grieving woman locking an empty building. That's not the kind of thing you interrupt at a funeral. Not out loud, not to her face. But you should have seen the looks that passed between the ones still standing on that porch, her brother-in-law included. He didn't ask her why. He just watched her walk back toward the house, hands in her coat pockets, and something in his face already deciding what story he'd tell about it later, at the diner, to anybody who'd listen. She's telling this part fast, hand moving along the milkhouse wall like she's still in a hurry to get to the good part. By Tuesday, they had a name for her at the feed store, the Padlock Widow. Somebody's wife heard it from somebody's husband and repeated it over the counter while she was buying nails, not knowing, or maybe knowing, that the granddaughter's mother stood 2 aisles over. Grief does funny things, they said. Locks a woman up tighter than the building. At the diner it was worse, because at the diner they had time to build on it. Her brother-in-law sat in the corner booth and told it his way. How she'd taken that key like it was a wedding ring. How she wouldn't sell the herd's records, wouldn't sell the old vats, wouldn't even let the county extension man in to appraise the equipment for a fair price. 41 days since the funeral, somebody counted. 41 days of a padlock on a building that hadn't produced a pound of anything since her husband's lungs gave out that January. She heard all of it eventually. Small towns don't let you not hear it. She didn't answer any of it, not once. Not to her brother-in-law's face at the co-op, not to the pastor's wife who meant well and asked if she was sleeping. She went home instead, and she went out to the barn at night with a flashlight, after the granddaughter's mother, just a girl then, 9 years old, was asleep, and she went through everything her mother-in-law had left behind 20 years before that. Boxes of canning jars, a cedar chest smelling of mothballs and hay dust. Nothing. It took her 6 nights of this before she found it, and she found it by accident, the way most true things get found. She'd knocked over a stack of old cream cans in the far corner of the barn, cans nobody had used since the co-op switched to bulk tanks in the 70s, and one of them didn't sound right when it rolled. Too heavy on one end. She sat down on the dirt floor right there, in her barn coat, and pried at the bottom of it with a flathead screwdriver, until it gave, a false bottom, welded in clumsy but solid, the kind of work a woman does herself when she doesn't want to explain to a welder why she needs it. Inside, wrapped in a flour sack towel gone stiff with age, was a notebook. She didn't open it that night. She sat there a long while just holding it, feeling the weight of it. This thing her mother-in-law had hidden well enough that a whole family missed it for 2 decades. Outside, the wind was doing what November wind does in that county, and somewhere past the fence line, a dog was barking at nothing, and she sat with that notebook in her lap and did not open it yet. "Come here. Mind the step. That board's been loose since Reagan was president, and I never did fix it." She opened it the next morning, had to, sat at the kitchen table with coffee gone cold, and opened that notebook like it might bite her. Cloth-bound, blue once, gone gray-brown at the corners from handling. Inside the front cover, a date in fountain pen ink, March 1967, and a name. Not her husband's name, his mother's. Her mother-in-law had been 26 years old when she started that notebook, younger than the granddaughter standing here right now, if you can believe that. The first 20 pages were just numbers, butterfat percentages, temperatures written in her mother-in-law's careful hand, morning and evening, day after day, month after month, the kind of record-keeping that looks obsessive until you understand what it's for. Then, on page 21, the handwriting changed, got smaller, more careful, like she was writing something she meant to keep. A recipe, raw milk, not pasteurized. The notebook was firm on that point, underlined twice. A wheel pressed by hand, wrapped in cloth, set in the cool of the milk-house cellar. And then a number that stopped her cold, sitting there at that table, with her coffee gone cold twice over now. 8 weeks, not 8 days, 8 weeks of aging, turning the wheel every 3rd day, and not one single instruction about hurrying it along. She thought about her father-in-law then, dead 11 years by that point, and how the family story always went that he'd been the practical one, the one who got them onto the co-op's bulk tank contract in 1969. Faster money, steadier money, milk out the door same day it came out of the cow. Nobody ever told the other half of that story. Nobody ever said there'd been a woman in that same kitchen doing something slower and better, and that the practical decision had walked right over it. Because here's what she understood. Sitting there, the notebook wasn't hiding a secret ingredient. It was hiding a schedule, a patience. 8 weeks where you don't sell a drop of that milk, where you let it sit and change and become something else entirely, while the bills keep coming and the neighbors keep asking why your tank truck hasn't been by. That's the part that would get her laughed at, later, when she started up again. Not the recipe, the waiting. She closed the notebook, wrapped it back in that stiff flour sack towel out of habit like it needed protecting still, then thought better of it and set it out on the table where she could see it, while she made a decision she hadn't told a single living soul about yet. Not the lawyer, not her sister, not the man from the co-op who'd already called twice that week, asking when she planned to sell. She touches the door frame here, the same spot every time, like she's checking it's still solid. Come on, she says. This part I remember by the hour. Her older son called it foolish before she'd even said the word cheese out loud. Her brother-in-law came by 2 days after the funeral, still in his good boots from the service, and told her the co-op wouldn't hold her spot forever. That a widow diverting milk was the kind of thing people talked about at the feed store for a year. She let him talk. She'd learned that from her husband's mother too, though she didn't know it yet. The notebook hadn't taught her that part. Life had. She did the math at the kitchen table 3 nights running. 41 cows. The co-op paid by the hundredweight, steady, dependable, boring money. The kind that kept the lights on and the loan current. If she pulled even a third of the herd's milk out of that pipeline for 8 weeks, 8 weeks where nothing came back, no check, no truck, nothing but wheels of something sitting in a room that hadn't been cleaned since before her husband was born. The loan payment due in October would be short, not a little short, short enough that the bank would notice. Her younger son wanted numbers. She didn't have numbers, only a towel-wrapped notebook and a recipe written in a dead woman's hand, and she told him so plainly, standing, right about where you're standing now. He said that wasn't a plan, that was a hope. She said hope was what her mother-in-law had lived on in 1961, and it had worked then. He didn't have an answer for that. She called the co-op man back on a Thursday, told him she'd be sending 3 cows worth instead of the herd, starting Monday, and no, she couldn't explain further. And yes, she understood what that meant for the contract. He went quiet on the phone, the way men do when they've decided a woman's made up her mind, and there's no use arguing with whether. That was the part nobody in town heard about for weeks, not the padlock. They already had that story chewed to nothing. But the quieter thing, the milk that didn't show up on the truck's manifest, the gap in the numbers the driver mentioned to his wife, who mentioned it at the diner, who didn't know what it meant, but knew it meant something. She didn't tell them. She went out to the milk house that Sunday evening with a bucket in each hand and the notebook propped open on the shelf where the light was best, and she started reading the first line of actual instruction she'd have to actually follow, not remember, not admire, follow. And she remembers standing there thinking, if this doesn't work, I have handed away money we don't have for a story I can't prove. She rushes it. That's the plain truth, and she says it plain now, walking the granddaughter past the shelf where the salt bins used to sit. She rushes it. April, and the bank statement had come the week before, and the number on it was smaller than the number she owed, and that kind of arithmetic does something to a person's hands. The notebook said 7 days of dry salting, turned every 12 hours, patient as a held breath. She gave it 4. Told herself 4 was close enough. Told herself the wheels looked ready. Told herself a lot of things a person tells herself when the electric bill is sitting on the counter face up. 11 wheels. She'd built a rack for them herself out of cedar slats, down in the milk house where the temperature held steady the way the notebook wanted, and she checked them every morning before the granddaughter's mother, a girl herself then, left for school. 3rd week, she noticed the rinds weren't tightening right. 4th week, there was a bloom of blue-gray creeping in from the edges that had no business being there, and a smell underneath the good smell, something sour and wrong. She called the county extension office. The man who came out was polite about it, the way people are polite when they already know the answer and don't want to be the one to say it. He turned one wheel over in his hands, pressed his thumb into the rind, and it gave too easy. Salted too fast, he said, sealed the moisture in. 11 wheels, gone. She figures it out later, sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil, near $600 in milk and rennet and cheesecloth, and her own labor, thrown into a slop bucket for the pigs, because that's the only use 11 ruined wheels of cheese have. The talk in town changed after that. It hadn't been kind before, but it had been curious kind, the kind of talk that leans in. After the wheels, it turned into something flatter. The feed store owner started saying it to her face instead of behind her, asked when she was going to quit playing at this and sell the herd proper, the way her husband would have wanted. A woman at church patted her hand and said grief does funny things to a person's judgment, and meant it as comfort. She didn't argue with any of it. She went back out to the milk house that same week, alone, and she read the notebook again, slower this time, and she found the line she'd skimmed past in April. A line about the salting that wasn't really about salt at all. It was about waiting, and how her mother-in-law had written it twice, once in the instructions and once in the margin, like she'd known somebody would try to hurry it. My granddaughter's got her hand on the cold box now, the one that used to hold the wheels while they turned. I tell her, that margin note took me 3 days to understand, and I'd read the whole notebook twice by then. Salt slow, the instructions said. 2 ounces per wheel, worked in over 4 days, not 1. That was the line I'd skimmed. But underneath it, crammed into the margin in her mother-in-law's cramped hand, was the second version, the one meant for somebody who wasn't listening the first time. It said, if you rush the salt, you rush the water out. And if you rush the water out, the inside never finishes what the outside started. You'll have a rind and nothing else. 6 weeks means 6 weeks. There is no shorter way that ends in cheese. I sat with that a long while. It wasn't instruction anymore, not to me. It was an argument she'd had with somebody, maybe herself, maybe her own mother-in-law, and she'd won it enough times to write it down twice, like she didn't trust one telling to hold. I did the arithmetic that night at the kitchen table, same table this girl's mother did her homework on. 40 gallons a week I'd be holding back if I followed it exact. 40 gallons not going to the co-op truck, not turning into a check, for 6 full weeks running. The banknote was due in September, regardless of what the milk house decided to do with its time. I wrote the numbers down twice too, same as she had, like writing them twice made them truer. Everybody had a warning. The feed store man had his. My brother-in-law drove out special to give his, standing in the yard with his hat off like he was already at another funeral. 6 weeks with no income off that herd, he said. And the note comes due regardless. And what happens then? You lose the barn along with the cheese? I told him I'd read the instructions. He said instructions don't pay banks. I didn't have an answer for that one that would have satisfied him, so I didn't try. I went back to the milk house instead, in the last light, and I looked at the empty racks where 11 ruined wheels used to sit. And I thought about how every one of those failures had come from me trying to shave a day here, an hour there, telling myself the schedule was a suggestion and not a law. It wasn't a suggestion. She'd written it twice. So I set the first proper batch that week, did every step exact, down to the hour, and I locked the door behind it, and I did not open that door again for 6 weeks, no matter what the truck driver said when he came for milk, and I turned him away at the gate. June came in hot that year, dust rising off the county road by 9 in the morning. I kept a log, not because she'd told me to, though her notebook had those little tables ruled in pencil, temperature in one column, humidity in the next, dated every 12 hours. I kept it because I didn't trust my own memory not to lie to me about what I'd already done. 54 degrees in the aging room, 78% humidity, turn the wheels, write it down. 54 degrees, 78%, turn the wheels, write it down. 6 weeks of that, twice a day, and nothing to show for it but a locked door and a neighbor who'd stopped waving from his truck. That's when the extension agent came by, a young man, maybe 30, sent out about something else entirely, some soil sample survey the county was running that spring. He knocked on the milk house door, out of curiosity more than duty, and I almost didn't let him in. But I did, because he asked to see the log before he asked to see the cheese, and nobody had done that yet. He stood at the counter and turned the pages slow. and I watched his face instead of his hands. He asked me who'd taught me to hold humidity that steady without a commercial unit. I told him it was my mother-in-law's room before it was mine, and the walls held the damp the way she'd built them to. He wrote something down himself, in his own notebook, which I noticed and didn't say anything about. He asked what I was aging, and I told him, and he didn't laugh. And he didn't tell me about a banknote either. He said the discipline was the interesting part. Not the recipe, the discipline. Said most operations he saw, even the big ones, didn't log like this. Said a room that's watched this closely usually makes something worth watching. I didn't feel vindicated exactly. I felt like somebody had finally read the same page I'd been reading. That's different from being right. That's being seen. He left his card on the counter, said he'd like to come back when the 6 weeks were up, if I didn't mind. I said I didn't mind. I watched his truck go down the lane past the mailbox, past the spot where the note had come due the week before, past the field I hadn't planted because I didn't have the hours in me to do both jobs. I went back to the log. 54 degrees, 78%. Turn the wheels, write it down. 4 weeks left. I didn't know yet what those wheels would taste like, or whether 4 weeks would matter at all if the bank called first. The bank didn't call first. I'll give you that much before I go on. 4 weeks turned into 2, turned into 6 days, and I stopped sleeping the way a person sleeps when they're not really worried, just watching. My granddaughter, you're standing right where I stood counting those days, right by that drain in the floor. Feel how it slopes. That's not an accident. That's his mother's doing, back in 1962, so the whey would run off instead of pooling. Late July, the day came. 81 degrees outside. The kind of heat that makes you doubt every choice you've made about temperature and patience. I cut into the first wheel of the second batch, and it wasn't crumbly like the first one had gone. It held. It had that give to it, like pressing a thumb into good bread dough. I didn't cry. I want to tell you I cried, but I didn't. I just sat down on the milking stool and looked at it a long while. The extension agent came back like he said he would. He tasted it standing at that counter, and he was quiet longer than I liked. Then he said it was good. Not remarkable, not the words you'd put on a label, just good, plain, like he was surprised to be saying something so simple. He asked if I'd had it tested. I hadn't. Didn't know how, didn't have the money for the kind of testing that sounded official. He made 2 phone calls right there from his truck, and within 10 days, a woman from the state came out with coolers and paperwork, and within 3 weeks after that, I had a license taped inside this cabinet door. You can still see the tape marks, right there. The first sale wasn't anything grand. A bistro over in the county seat, 40 miles east. The kind of place with a chalkboard menu and cloth napkins. The kind of place I'd never once eaten in myself. The owner bought 6 wheels. 6. Paid cash, counted it out on the hood of his car in the parking lot because he said he didn't trust checks from people he didn't know yet, and I told him I didn't blame him one bit. 6 wheels. Nobody in this county would have called that a fortune. The uncles who'd wanted to sell that milk fresh every week. The neighbors who'd shaken their heads at the padlock. None of them heard about it yet, not really. It was just 6 wheels of cheese going out the door of a building they'd all agreed should have been sold for scrap lumber. But I stood right here, right where you're standing, and I understood something, for the first time since the funeral. The waiting hadn't been the obstacle. The waiting had been the whole point, same as it had been for her. 30 years before I ever touched a wheel of it myself. That first winter, 6 wheels turned into 30, then 60. I kept the ledger the same way she'd kept hers. Pencil, not pen, because pencil admits when it's wrong, and pen pretends it isn't. By February, the debt on the equipment loan, the one the bank had been sending letters about since October, stood at $12,000. By April, it was gone. I paid it in 3 installments, cash orders at the teller window, and the same teller who used to ask me twice if I understood what I was signing just stamped the paper and slid it back without a word. That silence said more than any apology would have. The bistro owner told two other people. That's how it works out here. Not advertising, just word carried mouth to mouth like seed on wind. A place in the city 90 minutes north started calling every 10 days asking for 8 wheels, then 12. A small restaurant near the college wanted it exclusively for a cheese board they built their whole menu around, called it Farmhouse Reserve, on a printed card. Never once asked me to explain the process, just asked me to keep making it exactly the way I already was. 3 buyers. Steady, not flashy, no trucks lined up, no newspaper article, nothing the county would have noticed unless they were looking close. And out here, you'd be surprised how few people look close at anything that isn't failing. Second year, I put a new roof on the milk house, not because it needed saving for sentiment, because it needed saving for output. The vat couldn't sit under a leak in June and still hold curd worth trusting in August. Third year, the farm's books balanced for the first time since before he passed. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with the accountant, a young man from the extension office who'd been polite but doubtful the first time we'd met, and watching him go quiet over the numbers. He asked me, careful, like he didn't want to offend me by asking it plain, what was the actual secret? What made this cheese worth what it was worth? I told him there wasn't one. Told him it was just time, held on to on purpose, when everybody else in the county was selling theirs by the week. He wrote that down like it surprised him. By then, the milk house wasn't the building people whispered about when they drove past. It was the reason 3 restaurants called ahead to reserve wheels before they were even finished aging. It was the only part of the farm, in the end, that had never once needed the bank's permission to survive. So that's the whole of it. That's what the accountant wrote down, what the county eventually stopped whispering about, what the padlock was really guarding all those years it looked like it was guarding grief. She stops at the door of the milk house, the one that still sticks a little in July heat, same as it did 50 years back. The vat behind her granddaughter's shoulder is quiet now, scrubbed down for the night, smelling faintly of whey and cold stone. She reaches into her coat pocket. The key is small, brass gone dark at the edges, worn smooth on one side, from a thumb that pressed it for longer than most people press anything in a day. She doesn't hand it over right away. She turns it once in her fingers, like she's checking it's still the same key it always was. This is the one, she says. Not a copy. This one. Her granddaughter takes it careful, like it might still be locked to something. They thought I was foolish, the woman says, padlocking a milk house the day of a funeral, refusing every offer that came after. Man from the co-op offered me $11,000 for the equipment inside, cash, same week I buried your grandfather. I told him no, and he looked at me like grief had gotten into my head. She looks at the vat, not at the girl. It hadn't. I just knew what he knew, what his mother knew before him, that the whole trick of it, the only trick of it, was refusing to sell the milk while it was still becoming something. Everybody around here was moving fast. Bigger contracts, faster turnaround, milk out the door before it even had time to be anything but milk. And here was a notebook telling me the opposite. Wait, 6 weeks, 8, some of it. Let it sit under a cloth in the dark, and don't touch it, and don't sell it, and don't explain yourself to anybody who asks why. She closes her granddaughter's hand around the key. That's what they called waste, she says. The part that couldn't be rushed. Same word people use for anything they don't have the patience to watch happen. But it wasn't waste. It was the whole method. Every bit of what made it worth what it was worth was sitting right there in the part everybody else would have skipped. Outside, the light's gone gold the way it does late in the day here, laying long across the gravel and the fence line and the roof of the milk house, same slope of tin it's always had. Some things you can't hurry into being valuable, she says. You just have to leave them alone long enough, and trust that leaving them alone is the work. She doesn't say anything else about it. She never did need to.